In today's controversial and divided world, it can be pretty difficult to find one unifying factor that defines us all as Americans. So when we were prompted by C-SPAN with the topic of what does it mean to be an American, we were pretty stumped. Right off the bat, the most American things we could think of were burgers, fireworks, bald eagles, and big old trucks. But in this age, we often lose sight of what America was founded upon. One of the most important ideals implemented in America's government was that every man is represented. This is what makes us American: voting. The concept that everyone who's affected by government gets a say in their government. What's interesting is that our definition of everyone has evolved over the course of our government. It wasn't until early 1870, in Amendment 15, that Americans accepted male ex-slaves as part of America's everyone. And it wasn't until 50 years later, in 1920, that women were granted the right to vote. And now, in 2019, although it's often thought that we include everyone in our legislation, there are still people all around the country who aren't represented equally.
And we are back here to talk about redistricting and gerrymandering.
Political gerrymandering is probably one of the greatest threats to our democracy right now.
In today's America, it's almost impossible to avoid the political tension that surrounds gerrymandering. But what exactly is it?
Gerrymandering is the manipulation of political boundaries to benefit one party or group. It's typically done by partisans, but not always.
Politicians are able to do this by redrawing the lines that make up each district in a state. This gives those politicians the freedom to isolate certain groups of voters and, in turn, dilute the vote of the opposing party.
In Pennsylvania, 44% of the voters chose Democratic candidates for the House of Representatives in 2014. But 13 of the 18 districts, more than two-thirds, are represented by Republicans.
In other words, instead of voters picking their representatives, gerrymandering allows representatives to pick their voters.
So gerrymandering in the negative sense has sometimes been used to diffuse minorities amongst several districts.
And I think that's one of the sinister things about gerrymandering is that in some cases it gets down to literally street addresses in terms of where lines are drawn.
Throughout recent history, we've seen minority groups become the target of political gerrymandering. The 1993 case, Shaw versus Reno, saw North Carolina draw two majority black districts that snaked through black communities, dividing towns and splitting counties.
They wanted to exclude Durham because they didn't want to draw a district that a black had a fair chance to get elected in.
The Supreme Court struck down the drawing of these districts, declaring them unconstitutional. Nevertheless, it's undeniable that putting the power into the hands of partisan leaders will continue to suppress the vote of minority groups.
Well, I think people should have equal representation, that everyone's voice should be heard. So if you engage in gerrymandering, that really undermines the basic principles of democracy.
Welcome back. Native Americans have been struggling with the right to have a voice in the U.S. government since the nation was born.
To the average American citizen, voting is a sacred and unalienable right. However, the right to vote is never explicitly stated in the Constitution. Voting laws were originally delegated to the states. The state of North Dakota in particular has a history of passing voting laws that discriminate against the Native American population. Laws in 2013 and 2015 made it more difficult to identify oneself at the polls. And then in 2018, new legislation was passed
stating that people living at rural addresses, people like Native Americans who might live on a reservation, could not vote unless they had a street address.
So for a tribe, addresses are listed as P.O. boxes. And so the amount of indigenous people who have P.O. boxes that live on the reservation or near the reservation is significant.
Local tribes attempted to repeal this new law, stating that this would unfairly affect Native American citizens living on reservations. The case eventually went to the Supreme Court in October of 2018, where they decided not to review the law.
I guess you could say that the Supreme Court decision, sort of by omission, is that they upheld that law by not listening to that law.
The claimed reason for photo IDs is to ensure the integrity of elections.
We have now, for a very long time, had an honor system in our election process, and that unfortunately there are people who are willing to take advantage of that.
Which is why the time has come for voter ID, like everything else.
But as it turns out, legitimate cases of voter fraud are almost non-existent.
A recent study of voter fraud for about a 15-year period found about less than 35 actual cases of legitimate voter fraud.
So to require photo IDs, they're really trying to prevent people from voting who otherwise would be able to vote.
So although it is necessary to protect the integrity of our voting process, voter ID laws, by targeting specific groups of people, do way more harm than good. The right to vote has been one of the most controversial issues in American history. Despite the common belief that everyone is included in American voting legislation, state-governed laws dictate that that is not the case. Gerrymandering and voter ID laws are examples of ways in which some people still don't receive equal representation. Today, steps are being taken to fix these fundamental problems in our democracy. But as everyday American citizens, we can still influence change.
Because your vote makes a difference. It counts on who is going to represent you at city level, county level, state level, and the national level.
By exercising and protecting our right to vote, we decide whether America continues to be run by the people, for the people. And that is what it means to be American.